Hello everyone, I'm Dice. This is going to be my hands-on review and kind of a post-mortem too in a way of Reaping the Reaper from Tales of the Red. Now, I know right now a lot of the attention is all on Cyberpunk 2077 and Phantom Liberty, but this review has been a long time coming. And also, keep in mind, this review is a review. It's my opinion. Just my opinion. If there is one thing you should keep in mind, this is my experience and running it just for my crew. What may have worked for me and the little tweaks I did may not work for you. And to fill in those who may be new to this, Tales of the Red is the first book released after the core rulebook for Cyberpunk Red, the tabletop game. It holds a number of pre-made scenarios, and when I got my hands on it and read through it, Reaping the Reaper popped out to me due to its horror-like aspects. Now, while I'm not normally someone who's really for pre-made adventures, after being burned more than once in another game, I gave this one a shot and, I'll say it now, I had a pretty good time. Now, if you're going to be running anything in Tales of the Red, I highly recommend you head over to the Artosurian Games' website and head to their download section. Pick up the Tales of the Red Plus DLC. It's all the way down in the supplement bonus content section. This includes extra stuff that you can use easier in virtual tabletops, like Foundry, and it has a link for the raw files of tokens and maps too. If you're using anything from Tales, use this too, trust me. It'll save you quite a little bit of headache, and the only thing I wish this had was a token for Sally Smite, a character from the gig. That's it. Everything else I have used without issue. From here on though, there's going to be spoilers because I'm going to take you from the start to finish of my experience with this gig. This includes both the gig as written and my changes to each little part as we went through it. And to let you know also, I'm going to keep this pretty casual because, it's hot. My AC is currently out, and yeah, I don't want to sit in this booth all day. So let's get to it. Reaping the Reaper tells the story of a rogue AI called the Reaper that has begun to duplicate itself while also burning out the brains of unfortunate victims and taking them over in a kind of lobotomized form called a biodrone. Now, there is a scream sheet that does make a prelude situation to this gig called Don't Fear the Reaper, which is in the Cyberpunk Red data pack. And even though I did have access to this, I didn't use it. I instead seeded the setup by introducing Dan Renzer, a character you're going to hear about later on, in as a client for the players far in advance, as well as introducing some very specific internal agents of a certain brand. I tend to like dropping threads and hints in different ways, and I'll go over that kind of seeding a story another time. So, the gig is supposed to begin in the Forlorn Hope, with the crew all meeting their main contact, Major Veronica Stiles from Militech. Her focus to take out the Reaper is a personal one, as it took the life of her daughter, Jez. The layout is straightforward, direct, and clean-cut. She lays out the pay and the directions, which involves picking up an order from Faisal's Customs and delivering it to her operative, Tanzia. They get an address at the Upper Marina, head over, and pick up a specialized text scanner that can detect the AI. Unfortunately, after picking it up, they are ambushed by aerial drones and must fight them off to get away. This first part of the gig was clean, lean, and well plotted out. There was not really much need for fluff, and didn't really do much to divert or distract people. The only changes I even really did myself was, since I had a fixer in my crew, I tweaked the start for it to be handled directly by just her. She picked up the gig information, relayed it to the rest of the crew, and they went to do the pickup together. Now, barring the usual hyper-paranoid, mistrusting nature of all tabletop players, the pickup went just fine. The drones put up a fight, but to set the stakes a bit higher, when the main drone was taken out, it crashed and detonated in an explosion that my friends dodged. You can thank Jay Gray for that little addition. It was a really good idea, and it really upped the stakes for that fight. There was also a moment when Mouse connected with a drone and briefly glimpsed the Reaper in action in the architecture. He then immediately jacked out. He didn't want anything to do with that. The fight was brought to a quick end though, because you're going to learn as I continue this review about my player's addiction. Grenades. That's all I'm going to say now. You're going to catch it. You're going to catch it later. The fight, though, was well written, and a little theatrical too, due to the fact that the Reaper was announcing its arrival. After the fight, the drone's architecture is destroyed by melting down, and also a part of Mouse's van that they were using to travel. But it still ran, still worked. So after the pickup, they head over to meet Tanzia and another new face, Sally Smite, a techie. Using the detector, she manages to zone in on the Reaper's signal inside of the Little China combat zone. This tied in well since Mouse was actually living in the area, so he was able to help guide them to the CZ without much issue, to a rather well-kept area controlled by the Little China Redevelopment Association. The LCRA is doing a good job of trying to rebuild the area, thanks to security from a local gang called the Gold Dragons they pay off. The players tracked the Reaper to an old 30-story building called Guangbo Tower. Now, on top of the tower rests an old radio station, once known as KLIA 99.2, which even still has a burnt-out sign hanging off of it if it wasn't apparent before. Now, once they get inside and get past the receptionist, they have a choice of the elevators or stairs. I had a bit of a laugh about this one only because, for no reason, I got reminded of the old Final Fantasy VII climb of Shinra Tower. My crew decided to take the elevator, and as they were heading up, sure enough, the Reaper was ahead of them and caused the elevator to drop. Now here, I added that the elevator had a small architecture attached to it, in which there had previously been the Reaper inside that caused it to drop. They managed to stop the elevator from dropping fully to their possible demise though, even without really relying on Sally, which is an option, and I like that it was thrown in that she can save the players with her skills in case there is no one who actually can. So the elevator's not an insta-death situation, and I like that they have an out like that. Once they get to the top, they then find themselves outside of Vertex's virtuality venue. Say that 3 times fast. Now, Vertex's became my favorite spot in this entire gig because of the horror scene it immediately sets. You've got bodies everywhere, flickering emergency lights, just a very spooky and at times gross vibe. Of course, my players were paranoid of the bodies and slowly moved their way through the venue. I had a bit of fun with the venue and used the lights module of my foundry to make the emergency lights being the only things to light up doors. And through it, it made a bit of a puzzle where if they opened a door, it would show light on a new area and they could see directions to go. Although that was immediately eliminated thanks to flashlights they had, and they were able to spot a door in the back, and moving through the back area, Smoke and West, if you've watched my other videos you know who they are, found 2 active people installing a box into the equipment. Remember what I said my crew likes using? Grenades. They immediately used grenades and wiped out these 2 biodrones and dropped the net architecture to 2 HP, and took out the entire wall while doing so. The fight kicks off, there is some blood flying, and everyone makes it out fine due to some smart cover use and held actions. There is even a moment of glory from Ukulele, our wonderful medtech, walking into a back area to get nailed by a shot from a biodrone in the corner. Without even looking at it, he just shotgunned the biodrone, instantly wiping it out, and walked back to the main dance floor like nothing happened. Now, something to note, the grenade throwing happened very quickly towards the architecture, which has a caveat. If it's destroyed, everyone on the floor will be electrocuted as there's a massive overload. The gig outlines that Sally is quick to yell out that damaging the box could cause this, and I barely had time to get this out myself. They opted to detach the architecture from the radio transmitter in time though, like 1 round from it successfully activating. They really don't know how close they came to having the Reaper transmit itself with the old antenna, since they did not go into the architecture, because if they had, it could actually delay the Reaper's attempt to transmit. The box melts itself down after being detached as the Reaper inside destroys itself, and they're left with the aftermath. I really dug this part of the adventure, like I said, and even when I upped the number of biodrones, it was a pretty even fight. So right here is a nice little intermission in the gig. After all that, Tanzia and Sally root through the leftovers and the crew is allowed to go their own way. About a week passes in the timeline, and then they all get called up again to be let known it's not over. Potentially. They learn that the Reaper communicates via a neural interface, and all the victims on scene had the same internal agent, a media-aware brain gen. Remember me saying how I threw a few of these into the mix way in advance? One of my people did. They actually had one, and it was Mal's, one of our Netrunners. It was perfect. Now, there is a part in the gig that says if you do this, it is not the same model, and I kept to it. But it was a fun little moment of fear that carried all the way through to the end of the gig. If you get the chance to, use this angle. It makes a good air of we must protect them, or are they going to turn on us? They get told by Major Styles to go get another set of equipment, she ups the pay, and gives them the address to where Faisal will be waiting. Upon arrival, they snag 3 biodrone disruptors and a wrist-mounted Reaper detector. Faisal throws in 2 EMP grenades too to make up for them being ambushed. He shows them video of them testing the disruptors out on a random dock worker, which turns out to be a biodrone, and it gets zapped. There was a spy the whole time at the dock. Now, once they leave this meetup, they run into Dan Renzer. Dan is a Netwatch agent, low tier, and is on the same lead they are about the Reaper. Due to my preparations beforehand, the crew knew Dan back when he was part of the NCPD in a higher aspect, but he switched for Netwatch after being extorted by another detective. Our lawman, West, even worked for him while she was not with the crew, so this made the meetup less awkward and much more friendly and personal. They had to grab a bite to eat at Mr. Rice Guy, a spot nearby in Pacifica, and they settle in to discuss the case. While they are eating, and Ukulele is currently choking on food, the Reaper detector starts pinging. They grab their guns and set up in the area outside of Mr. Rice Guy, as Dan constantly is telling them to avoid collateral damage inside the restaurant. They're in Pacifica, and also he's a fan of the place. I'll admit that this was me trying to get ahead of them blowing the restaurant up with grenades, cause I saw it coming. Once they get outside, they tuck behind these patio walls I had set up for a little bit of cover, and yep, more grenades. The Biodrone ambush at this restaurant is over within 2 rounds due to every single one of them lobbing grenades. Bane of my game, I swear. After the destruction, the team and Dan set out to track the clearly still operating Reaper. Dan secures an AV from the NCPD and takes them to a transmitter he can bet can scan the whole city. The old SAT receiver on top of the ruined N54 building inside of the hot zone, which is where the bomb happened, if you know anything about Cyberpunk lore. Now, this was another one of my favorite spots of this gig, and I actually drew on Chernobyl a bit too for some narrative reasons on smoke still being coming up out of the crater. Once on the roof, they begin to attach the scanner to the still working equipment, and thanks to a nearby mummified resident's tent, they do keep themselves covered as the wind shifts and begins to irradiate the rooftop. If I ever run this adventure again, I may add some extra urgency by upping the damage per round. They were very smart though, only having 2 of them out on the rooftop while the others kept in the AV for shielding. So for a non-combat encounter, this was actually really cool, and I like the dynamic of it. They ping the only signal in the city, and they set off. Now, right here in the gig, this is where I did the most changes, if you ask me. Dan is written to drop them off and return the AV, as they then go to speak with Styles for a final planning session before the showdown. Instead of that, just to make the segue a bit smoother and to make it feel urgent, I had Styles use a holo call in the back of the AV instead. The same discussion happens, and Dan begins to take them in the AV to the side of the signal, and lands outside to set up his own perimeter. Now, as written, Tanzia is also supposed to be there to help set up this perimeter, and since Dan flew them there, I did not have her present. Now, in the discussion between point A and point B, they begin planning, and since they had this aerial asset, they wanted to drop some people on the roof. It's not written, but I allowed 3 to go in from the roof and down into a storage room in the back, while there was a normal assault from the front. So, to set the stage, Mind Nuts Lover is a club that is supposed to be shut down for renovation. Once in, they walk in to see only red emergency lights blinking, and once they're in far enough, they see this big, hulking figure with a black face mask that digitizes into a green, glowing, laughing skull. And once that happens, the lights flip on, and they see these still, lifeless biodrones just waiting to turn and fight. Now, instead of having them standing, I had this be a scene of another massacre, but the drones were getting a free stand whenever I activated them. So, how did this play out? The crew in the back opens the back storage door, sees the Biodrone DJ still and focused forward, and of course, the grenades go flying. The DJ booth, though, is encapsulated by bulletproof glass, which, while they do hit a few inactive Biodrones, one of them bounces off and lands a bit too close to the door they are throwing from. The grenade goes off and hits everyone. This was the first time this happened, too. Every time they've used grenades, it's been successful. This is the first time they got caught in the backblast. And then another problem came to light. Something that was not mentioned or brought up is one of my players, Carmilla, had not repaired her armor jack, and it was dangerously low. She's immediately almost out of the fight from the damage from the grenade, and to not kill her character off because she wasn't present, we have her retreat back to the roof. After the grenades go, the final showdown plays out. There are some pretty intense moments that happen during this fight, as Ukulele is even sporting his full metal gear and is effectively going toe-to-toe with the Biodrone DJ, face to face. McKellen, a new member of the crew and a K-Tech exec, fires smart rockets at the DJ, which end up catching Yuki in the same explosions. Yuki barely manages to survive this fight, with only 2 HP for the record thanks to a speed heal, and his metal gear was dropped to only about 4 SP. It was bad. And when it comes to quelling the waves of Biodrones, you've got Mouse, West, and McKellen the whole time, while Smoke and Yuki were focused on the DJ. At the door, West is popping in and out of cover, just taking down Biodrone after Biodrone, until one holds an action to attack when she steps out of cover again. It fires and hits a crit on West. This one, though, wound up being a tarot crit. and the one that was drawn was the Hermit, outright blinding her. Now, in my game, I also apply the normal crit injury as well as the tarot. She also winds up with a disabled hand, which is another recurring thing with her. So, in one shot, a normal biodrone had blinded and basically crippled West. She then does what West does. Blind, and with one hand, she drops that biodrone and another one of them and tucks back into cover. So, something is happening while all this is going down. Smoke had begun to jump into the Reaper's armored architecture and, for some fun, she began to actually interface with the biodrone control nodes. She was constantly hopping in and out, cloaking herself, using control, doing whatever she could to stall the biodrones, beating the DVs, to my shock, and just making the biodrones cease attacking until the Reaper was able to move and cancel the previous order. While this back and forth is going on in the net, they managed to actually drop the biodrone DJ. The Reaper gives an order for the drones to attempt to rescue the armored storage and get it to safety. At this time, due to the fact that we did have a player not present due to something they couldn't control, and they got taken out immediately too by an accident, for balance sake, I did get Dan involved after West's incapacitation. He stepped in and took out 2 drones by the entry door, while everyone was focusing fire on the armored backpack on the back of the DJ, which was destroyed by a final blow from Mouse with a stab and twist of his knife. It was a hell of a fight. It was a crazy ending and they were left in shambles, but they survived. Now, did you notice something I didn't bring up that whole fight? Those biodrone disruptors? Despite being given these, the only times they ever got used by my crew was about 3 attempts to use them either on Biodrone Pluses, which are stronger biodrones, or the Biodrone DJ itself. They used the EMP grenades just fine, but when they used the disruptors, they used them on the exact targets they could not work on. So they did not get much use at all. They ended up only using their own gear to brute force the battle instead. And even though they did this, they came out fine. As fine as you could be. There were some arms hanging off bodies. And while the grenades did soften up the biodrones around the back, in the end, it was just some good shooting and teamwork and cover use that brought the Reaper down. So, final notes. I had tried to keep it as close as I could to how it was written, because I knew I did want to give this a good review shot afterwards. The one thing you can never predict as a GM is what your players are actually going to do versus what you want them to do. Be willing to be flexible, and never punish them for being resourceful. Yes, during this whole thing, which we started reaping the Reaper in December and we only finished it at the end of May, the grenades were used a lot, but only slightly threw the balance off. I did not really increase the number of biodrones or up their HP or anything like that, and they still got a hell of a challenge. I did wish that my Netrunners, there were 2, by the way, in this crew, attempted to fight the Reaper in the net a bit more, but they were obviously terrified to do so, which means I did my job on that part. They treated it not like a joke, they treated it like a real threat. Now, I tend to be a little theatrical in how I portray the net and how I make the Reaper make its presence known, but nothing I did actually changed the mechanics as they were written. The Reaper in the net was a fun enemy, and the control nodes actually controlling the biodrones in that final fight was such a fun addition that I'm glad R. Telsorian Games wrote that into the fight. The fights were well balanced, and I dug how it felt like a wave standoff at the end. The characters are all well written, there were actual personal stakes and hatred of the Reaper or motivations that made sense, and Dan has become a bit of a beloved character in our game due to their history with him now rather than Styles. Even Sally, who I felt was used more as exposition, which is not a bad thing at all, felt fun to run. There was a nice dynamic of Sally being a menace to Tanzia too, who was just trying to keep her alive. The provided architectures were straightforward and awesome, the stat blocks were solid for each NPC, and it all felt very well put together and cohesive. I really owe how successful this gig was to the fact that it actually felt personal, even if my crew did not like Major Styles. I still got no clue why they hate her, I really don't. As for recommendations if you're running this gig, I highly suggest that you make the drones in the very first fight a bit of a threat by having the main large air drone do a crash and explosion right beneath where it may be hovering at the time it's destroyed. Treat it like a normal grenade explosion. I also really suggest sneaking in some brain gens early on, just to give that little spook if it's your taste to do so. And if you have the option to do the scream sheet to give some history with Styles, do it. Don't just hop directly into this. Have a little prep beforehand because, to an inexperienced crew, I feel this gig may eat them alive. But I had smart players who knew the value of being prepared, using covert tactics, and they also lived by the rule of boom, which is what I'm going to be calling it from here on out. I think a good 12 grenades got thrown in all total. At least it feels that way. I know it was at least 10. Z may correct me later. So, Reaping the Reaper. Solid gig from Tales of the Red. I highly recommend it. And that's coming from a guy who doesn't dig pre-made adventures. This gig actually changed my mind on them, and is why I now have no trouble using pre-made adventures in other games. I primarily write my own arcs, but now, I'm just really not against giving them a shot. Give it a try, you won't be disappointed, but that's it for me. I'm gonna wrap it up here. I'm still preparing to go to Gen Con 2023, the GoFundMe's still down below. If you want to help, go ahead. I'm working my tail off myself too, so one way or another, you will see me there. And of course, the main reason I want to go is to give the Edgerunners mission kit a proper try, at least the playtest. That is still planned to be there. But yeah, that's it for me. It's way too hot in here. Take care, everyone, and I hope you find yourselves a good table.